Our theme for today's celebratory event is capacity building for physiotherapists as evidence-based rehabilitation practitioners in developing countries. And so the aim for today's session is to explore as well as discuss ways therapists working within our context and other lower middle income settings can build to become global evidence-based rehabilitation professionals. And so for today, our objectives are to discuss the capacity building, like I mentioned earlier, explore ways that rehabilitation professionals can attain this capacity building. We also want to share insights on how therapists can identify opportunities for capacity building, looking at stories and lived experience rehabilitation professionals to build their capacity as global icons. And then we'll finally end with a brief discussion and an empowerment generation of therapists among our midst in becoming rehab professionals. And lastly, it's our 2 years birthday, and we just want to share and celebrate with you. And so our plan is to look at a brief history of the group. MC has already touched on it, so I'll just whisk through. And then we'll explore the concept of capacity building, looking at the concept itself, ways to of therapists. We'll learn lessons and hear insight from lived experiences of therapists. And then we'll look at some recommendations for as rehab professionals working within this space. And lastly, since it's our anniversary, we want to look at the 2-year journey and explore some of our impact, particularly regarding capacity building. So here we have, like we've been mentioned, the founding members. And like Mary said, our vision is to promote evidence-based practice culture. Therapists first because we are physios, but also spreading our tentacles across other rehabilitation professionals with just one aim. We want to advance quality patient-centered care, improve practice. And we do this through 4 key angles or aims: research, training, advocacy. Our motto is promoting evidence-based practice in physiotherapy in Ghana and beyond. Some of our activities, and these are our 2 flagship programs, the evidence-based updates, like Mary mentioned earlier, churning out compiled high-quality evidences to support the practice of physiotherapy in Ghana. We also privileged to have a building database to store these evidences as a go-to for colleagues to be able to assess evidence. I mean, we run capacity building webinars and workshops. Here are some examples. And lastly, below in the image is one of our most popular workshops that we had some time ago, building the hands-on skills in therapists in acquiring evidence-based concepts, but the expertise and the skill set to be able to practice it within their clinical practices. We'll now move on to exploring the theme. So what really is capacity building? And capacity building is defined as the process that improves the ability of a person, group, organization, or systems to meet its objectives and perform better. This is a more complex one, and it's defined as the process by which individuals, groups, organizations, institutions, there's an addition of country here, to first develop, enhance, and organize their systems, resources, and knowledge, all geared towards improving their abilities at individual level and collectively to be able to perform well, solve problems, and achieve their set goals and objectives. This is the much simpler one for me that I think I'll be running with this evening. The capacity building is the process by which individuals and organizations obtain, improve, and retain the skills, knowledge tools, equipment, and other resources needed to be able to do their job competently. And I think for us, that is the aim. So when we lace it up with the theme, how can we build our capacities as rehabilitation professionals to be able to improve our skills, to be able to retain our skills, the knowledge we have gained, the tools we use, the equipment to support our care, and other resources that we need to be able to be competent, effective, efficient, and evidence-based rehabilitation professionals. Capacity is multidimensional, and it's not a one-person thing like we've seen in the definition. And it's also dynamic as well. And at the end of the day, capacity building should always lead to improvement on performance. And if it doesn't, then you are not improving or building your capacity enough. And like we are doing, we are looking at capacity within our context as developing countries and narrowing it further down as Ghanaian therapists working within the rehabilitation space. Within the health sector, capacity building is at 4 levels: health system, the organization that we work in, the health personnel, which is ourselves, and the individuals or the community that we find ourselves in. So what is evidence-based rehabilitation professionals? I'd like to start from the evidence-based practice concept. What is that global mandate? What is the buzz about evidence-based practice? Well, physiotherapy, among other rehabilitation professionals, we are recognized as evidence-based practitioners. Why? Because it's our mandate, it supports lifelong learning, it supports person-centered care, it improves practice, and above all, we are able to advance professionally within the context of evidence-based practice. For some of us, we might have heard about it, but don't really know what it is. And by definition, it is the integration of the best research evidence, and I'm focusing here on the best and not just any research evidence, with clinical expertise and patient values in the process of decision-making concerning our patients. Pictorially, here is it. So the intersection of all these 3 key evidence is what evidence-based practice is, and they are within the big umbrella of context. A while back, gleaning on information from the forefathers who have gone ahead of us in the evidence-based practice concept, I coined this definition that an evidence-based practice physiotherapist, and within the context of this talk, an evidence-based practitioner is one that integrates the best research evidence with his or her clinical expertise and patient perspectives in physiotherapy or rehabilitation, clinical decision-making, care. And so whilst we go along, we are teasing that connection. Why the topic? Where does capacity building come in? What's the place of evidence-based practice? How do we tie it all together with rehabilitation? There's a buzz about rehabilitation, and people might ask, so what is there? We know of rehabilitation. It's been there for years. So what is new? Well, what is new is that over the years, it's been noticed that rehabilitation has been under-prioritized. Like we physios, there are a lot of things that we want, we need to work with that we don't have. Basically, because when we look at the genealogy of health professionals and other people within the rehabilitation space, the priorities are not the same. And so this is the buzz. And so it's quite important that there are several million people living within the continent now who need rehabilitation for some form of condition or another that are not receiving it. And like I mentioned, rehabilitation is now underdeveloped across the world, and not only lower middle income countries, is under-resourced, and we see it clearly within our context, Ghana, and it's under-prioritized as well. And the situation is even more dire within our settings, hence the need for us to advocate for this concept and see how best we can improve it and make ourselves better, our profession better, and advance patient-centered care. So why the buzz? Why the drive for rehabilitation? Basically, as I said, it's a global need, but we are narrowing down onto our context here, Ghana, and our colleagues within the other lower middle income countries. There is lack of prioritization, there is lack of funding policies and plans for rehabilitation at all levels, I'll say, department, institutional, regional, and even the globe. There's lack of available rehabilitation services in urban areas, and there's a disparity between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. Rehabilitation is expensive, and we know that physio is equally expensive as well. And here is the thing: lack of trained rehabilitation professionals, one. And then what makes it even challenging is that the few that have been trained are seeking greener pastures elsewhere. And this makes the situation even more difficult. So there's lack of resources that I've mentioned, consumables to work, and so on and so forth. This is not new, but we are mentioning it to be able to help us build a point. So as I mentioned, our focus for this evening session, it's on the 4, 5, and 6. The lack of trained personnel, both in quantity and quality, to be able to support the rehabilitation agenda as we move along. There's a growing need for health, human resource across the health divide. And for us, we would look at what rehabilitation is. There is still inadequate rehabilitation professionals, inadequate occupational therapists, speech therapists, physiotherapists, and so on and so forth to help rehabilitate people who need it the most. Globally, there is a shortage, but our situation is worse in lower middle income countries. And like I mentioned, there's uneven use, uneven services for rehabilitation across countries, across nations, within countries, and so on and so forth. And lastly, there's lack of institutional capacity, insufficient jobs, and ineffective incentives for healthcare workers, narrowing down onto rehabilitation. So what are the possible avenues to address this rehabilitation need? Because you and me know that it is indeed a challenge. And for some of us, we are just poised to be able to help contribute our quota to make this happen and to move rehabilitation forward, to strengthen it within our system here in Ghana, other lower middle income countries, and contribute to the global conversation as well, to push this United Nations and WHO agenda forward. And so expert recommendations and evidence support say that we can only optimize rehabilitation, particularly in developing countries like us, when we find the need to scale up what rehabilitation is. We build the capacity of rehabilitation professionals, and one of the ways is what we are doing this evening, expanding the availability of evidence to support rehabilitation through research. And finally, there's a depth of rehabilitation literature, information, particularly from Africa. And so a huge gap needs to be filled. And we can only fill the gap in building evidence to support our claim and what we want the ministries and the health services to do for us when we have evidence to show, and this evidence is lacking. And so one of the ways to be able to help build capacity is to build capacity in research to support physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and other rehabilitation data to support decision-making. This diagram here explains the theme for our event today, which is building capacity of therapists as evidence-based rehabilitation professionals within developing countries, and more specifically within our context, Ghana. And so for us, our understanding that in building capacity to be evidence-based rehabilitation professionals, we need an understanding of two main concepts: the concept of evidence-based practice and the understanding of rehabilitation. Regarding rehabilitation, we are more specifically looking at the Rehabilitation 2030 agenda and its action plan, its implementation within our profession as physiotherapists or other rehabilitation professionals, and its strengthening within our health system here in Ghana and other lower middle income settings. We do great jobs as rehabilitation professionals, but the documentation, bookkeeping, the literature to be able to support our work and make evidence-based claims and objective claims is missing, and we need to look at that. Education is key. And so we looking again at our education system, taking on the responsibility to train ourselves with the support of our environment is one of the recommendations. Advocacy is key. And as a research group, one of our arms, like you saw, is advocacy. We are advocating for evidence-based practice within physiotherapy and our colleagues in the other rehabilitation fields, not for the fun of it, but to be able to produce and support quality patient-centered care and advance our practice. Again, from the global perspectives, one of the ways we can build capacity is through collaborations, those strategic partnerships and networks, and engaging in fora and events, coming up with innovative ideas to be able to support our patients, our clinical practice, and do things to be able to build our capacity, not necessarily in rehabilitation, but also in other spheres like leadership, AI, any capacity building angles that can support us to become all-round global experts is the way to go. From the African perspectives, the WHO African region is talking and engaging practitioners within the continent. And what their recommendations are is that we need to develop that leadership skills as rehab professionals. If we fail to build our capacity in rehabilitation or in leadership, we might not be able to find ourselves in the corridors of power to push our claims forward and make our profession prioritized. Advocacy has come here again, which is quite important. Promotion and encouragement of specializations is key in this agenda. Strengthening interprofessional collaborations. And I'm glad that we have some of our colleagues from the other rehabilitation professionals online. And then finally, contextualizing capacity building. Not all capacity building or angles or areas or training might help us. Our knowledge to be able to identify what works and what would help us is what is key. What does the Ghanaian perspective say? We are bringing it home. And to be able to engage, and we having a discussion this evening, I had engaged with some stakeholders within the Ghanaian rehabilitation fraternity, because contextually, we need to understand from the clinicians how things are going, what the challenges are, how their capacity, and then we can make meaningful, relevant, and quality evidence to be able to move this agenda forward. I want to take a break here and to find out from us, we can drop it in the chats, that based on our discourse so far, what are some of the challenges or what are some of the limitations, that limit us as clinicians working within lower middle income countries to build our capacity? I'm happy to hear some few thoughts from the chat, and then we'll continue from there. How or what are the limitations? What impacts our inability to build our capacity as clinicians? Because we have some of our colleagues, working for a number of years who have not really gotten the ability to advance themselves in certain skills. Some have, some haven't. What are our thoughts? What are the challenges? What limits us within this context? I'm happy to see some few things from the chat, okay? I see PT Roxanne saying opportunities through funding. And that's also, funding is indeed a huge challenge. I agree to that. Kindly drop some comments. Lack of specialized training within the Ghanaian context. Spot on, spot on. Some few more. Lack of higher education opportunities within the Ghanaian context. Absolutely right. But we thank God for the opportunity of UG, University of Ghana, starting the postgraduate program. Hopefully baby steps would grow. Brain drain, lack of mentorship, Time is indeed a really huge challenge as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your comments. I appreciate it. Indeed, you are not wrong. Globally, these are challenges and not necessarily peculiar to the Ghanaian context. However, these are challenges that we thought would explore to see how best we can move things forward. Now, having identified some of the challenges that limits us, I'm now interested in knowing how we can build our capacity as evidence-based practitioners. We've had a dialogue for now, and how can we go about it? So with the challenges of lack of mentorship, lack of higher education, lack of specialized training within the system, how then can we go about this? How can we build capacity, circumventing these challenges? We take a bold step, we take baby steps, and then we can take on from there. I'm looking in the chat now to hear some comments from you, then we can proceed. How can we build our capacity as evidence-based practitioners? Well, I see lack of college physio, rehab to run specialized courses, distant learning opportunities. Thank you, Gertrude. That's amazing. Pursuing further studies. Thank you, Innocent. Can I have 2 or more comments? How can we build our capacity in brainstorming? How can we build our capacity? Being intentional about acquiring knowledge. And that's amazing. Rehabilitation management competencies. Thank you, Kojo Kumi. Having regular workshops. Thank you, Peter Gumoa. Develop faculty self-efficacy for teaching and modeling EBP for students. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. And from Elizabeth Taylor, just as courses like data analysis are easily accessible platforms like Coursera, I wish we could build a platform where physios can easily access new skills. I agree with you on that. James Satubra says workshops organized by our own professionals. That's spot on. The quest to self-improve. Inadequate regulations of members within the council. So that's another level. Thank you so much, our audience. I just love the energy and the engagement. Now, like I mentioned, we now want to zoom into the Ghanaian perspectives. And I had to engage with some professionals working within this context, to have that first-hand feel. And here are some of their recommendations. That we can build capacity as evidence-based rehabilitation practitioners in Ghana when we let go of some of these virtual sessions that we have and then go back to hands-on skills. Postgraduate training is great, but we need to look at the practical aspects. So I think that resonates with our colleagues in the chat as well. Regular trainings for clinical tutors, who some call preceptors, because these are the colleagues that support the clinical training within the departments and units. And so regular training for them to bring them up to speed is key. Identifying areas for resourcing other than health ministries. And the suggestions are NGOs and charities to support funding as a key challenge. Encourage community engagement and networking. We are here today. We saw our chair. It was through networking that I got the opportunity to meet her, and by extension, the group. Networking is key, and that will help us in building capacity. One good thing that came up is good leadership and mentorship. You can have the idea, but as emerging physiotherapists, we might not be able to hone it well. And so with good leadership to help identify potential in our young colleagues, seeing those who have the leadership skills to support them is key. Positive encouragement, building partnerships and collaborations, training, taking courses like somebody mentioned in the chat, Coursera, and there's a need for revamping our facilities with modern evidence-based details. I mean, we can go build our capacity, go for further training. If we are returning back to almost outdated equipment to work, that is a challenge. And so whilst we build our capacity as well, we look at the resources to support our work. And from our chief physio, he said, integrating evidence-based practice into health systems in Ghana, Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Service, and the private sector. Thank you, sir. That is spot on as well. And from Richard Nikote, develop intermittent pools to get perspectives on practice as physios in various specialties. More exposure to student physiotherapists also. We like to blame our leaders, or to put maybe a heavy blame on our leaders. But then we have a responsibility as well. And one of the suggestions that came is that search for knowledge and information, cultivate the habit of reading. And examples were Physiopedia, PhysioPlus, etc., like Coursera that was mentioned. And look for opportunities and pursue these through CPDs, conferences, webinars, etc. Like I said, it's quite important when we are having such discussions to be able to learn from experiences of those who have gone ahead of us, who have made it. And so whilst I prepared for this session, I had engaged with some 2 or 3 physiotherapists who are trailblazers, physiotherapists who are evidence-based practitioners, physiotherapists who have defied all odds to build their capacity as evidence-based practitioners working within the rehabilitation field in diverse specializations. And so as emerging researchers, as emerging physiotherapists and other rehabilitation professionals, it's quite key for us to hear their experiences and pick 1 or 2 from it. Here we have Peter Alberta Roxon, who is the newly elected Vice Chair of Physiotherapy, World Physiotherapy African Region, but also one of the coordinators of the World Health Organization Rehabilitation Alliance, someone with the wealth of experience. And I'm privileged that I was there when she was rising and I saw her growth. And so we could not have engaged with somebody better. I was interested in knowing what has driven their growth, what has driven her motivations, her inner wranglings, for us to also learn from. And what she said is that I had a good mentor and I was challenged. I challenged myself to get better. We saw from the text that mentorship is key and leadership is key as well. And so for our colleagues, please take note. She also said that she was always hungry for the next stage, that she will look for opportunities, she will grab those opportunities and move forward with that. And people who are within her circles know this ambitious aspect of her. We cannot all be the same, but I do know for sure that ambition, good ambition, will help you drive your capacity. She will search and pray for opportunities. She never looks at those threats and she never gives up as well. And these are profound nuggets from our senior colleague. I went on to another colleague of ours, trailblazing within the field of ergonomics, doing amazing things within our fraternity, both within the African region and the globe as well. The same question went to him. What has driven your growth to build your capacity? He said negative and traumatic experiences in his earlier career drove him to develop himself and just to be better. And so sometimes the bad experiences will push us on. The good experiences will push us on as well. No matter where you are, nothing is a limitation. And that is what Dr. Augustine said. Said, I had a good buddying system. And this is quite new and profound, that sometimes we need to get colleagues who will check on what's new, what's happening within this field, what can we do, what course can we take. That was one of the profound nuggets, that helped him in rising, because he had a good buddy system. They checked on each other, they had similar interests. They pursued further things together. There was no competition, no bad blood, just 2 colleagues working hard to advance themselves. He also had a good mentor like our senior colleague did. And then he took courses and took courses and took courses. Not all of us might be able to take courses, but that was how he did it, both paid and unpaid. And so from our colleague, Dr. Augustine Nakwa, your experiences should spur you on. Never look back. Have a good colleague who you can hold accountable, check on each other, and advance together. Have good mentors to support you. And finally, when there is an opportunity, please do take it. There were some common themes between the two I thought I would highlight. Both had the innate drive to build themselves, and so they pursued several capacity building opportunities to develop. Both were dedicated and willing to learn. There was an eagerness to advance their professional career. They were both committed to achieve their set goals. They were just hungry for the next level. Both good and bad experiences just spurred them on to achieve. Lastly, both are Christians, and their Christian faith and belief just spurred them on onto greater heights. We also have some young colleagues among us who are wondering, students, interns, and so on. How can we build the capacity of the next generation to become rehabilitation professionals? Some few recommendations from our expert stakeholders are: one mentioned that training a matured dog is difficult. There is the need for us to cut them young and mold them. And she has recommended the need for sensitization to start at the secondary school levels to build capacity upwards. It's important to encourage them to engage in community service, as this will build empathy to serve as well as lead. Capacity building is not one-directional, and so all hands on deck is the way to go. Train, retrain until perfect. Do not be a local champion. You are not in competition with any of your colleagues. Build yourself up and compete at the global stage. Lastly, experienced colleagues who have gone ahead within the profession should be available to mentor the young ones in building their capacities to become evidence-based rehabilitation professionals. We were also interested to understand from our stakeholders the machinery we can use to build capacity of the next generation of therapists. One recommendation is that we cannot always wait for the ministries of health and so on and so forth, the government institutions, to fund some of our activities and research. And so first and foremost, the way to go is to explore non-governmental organizations, charities, and missionary organizations to help fund rehabilitation. We are quite engaged as physios with physiotherapy outreach programs, but a recommendation here and the new outlook is to sensitize secondary schools in building capacity from that angle. We need to identify partners that we can approach for support. And finally, education is key, and we need to explore several other training facilities. And we cannot talk without looking at advocacy campaigns. For us to be able to develop as evidence-based rehabilitation professionals, it is important for us to strengthen our advocacy campaign like we are doing now as an evidence-based practice research group. We cannot be talking about capacity building without not looking at the capacity building initiatives of the evidence-based practice research group as well. And so in this last section, we'll explore a little bit about how we as a group are also building capacity. And I'll here remind us about the vision of the group, which is to promote evidence-based practice culture among physiotherapists and other rehab professionals to advance quality patient-centered care within and beyond Ghana through research training, advocacy, and capacity building. And so regarding our capacity building initiatives, we build capacity through training workshops, through partnerships and networks, through mentorships, and finally through scholarships. And so here we see 4 awardees of 2 of our scholarship initiatives that we have, full-length videos of their impact stories will be linked in the description box below. But the above are awardees of both the Beatrice Sankah Evidence-Based Practice Research and Training Grant, which was funded by the Global Partnership Awards, University of Southampton, and also the EBP JBI Comprehensive Systematic Review Training Scholarship as well, which was funded by the JBI collaborations. What's next for us as a group? We continue in our vision, we continue in our advocacy, and still pushing the frontiers of evidence-based practice within physiotherapy in the lower middle income space. We are looking to adding on into our initiatives the publication of case reports, particularly clinical evidence to support rehabilitation. We are also looking to having zonal and regional training workshops on evidence-based practice, and by extension start setting up a zonal representatives or collaborators within the evidence-based space in these regions. And finally, we are growing and we've got our networks and collaborations to thank. Our next steps as a group is to becoming a JBI affiliate group in expanding our activities and having that global networking and collaboration as well, all in the aim of moving this vision and agenda forward. Our take-homes really, and a few takeaways for our consideration. One of our key aspect stakeholders, and P.T. Roxon, said, "For lack of knowledge, my people perish." And so to build capacity, we need to sensitize. And I dare add here that with advocacy. Finally, our expert colleague, Dr. Aqua, also mentioned that don't be a local champion. Build yourself up and compete at the global stage. Capacity building needs an all-hands-on-deck approach. All must get involved. And finally, you are responsible for your own capacity building, dear early career clinician. Develop your innate drive to better yourself and take that bold step today. I acknowledge all our stakeholders, both our expert stakeholders and the clinical physiotherapists, particularly those at the ministries, the regional hospitals, our WHO representatives, our World Physio representative, who supported in the discussions to build up evidence for this keynote speech. I also want to thank all colleagues within the Evidence-Based Practice Research Group for the conceptualization of this second anniversary celebration and the discussions to come up with a theme. Follow me on these handles. Thank you very much for your attention and your audience.